What's going on, Knicks fans? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Cap Rules Everything Around Me. Cream, get the money, dollar bills, y'all. I am your host, Jeremy Cohen. We are 2 days away from the NBA draft. We've already seen some news coming in, of course, about today. It was OG Anunoby opting out of his player option, something that certainly over the last few months was expected. I had been under the hope, of course, that when acquired, opt in, extend from there. His value is clearly too much, and I don't blame him. Got to chase that money. So good for him. He's a free agent. He can absolutely be talking with other teams as of when free agency opens. But until then, there is time for him and the Knicks to be able to come to agreement on a deal. Do I expect it? Maybe not. I think some other dominoes have to fall into place. I'm not quite as nervous about him leaving as maybe some others might. And I understand why. Unrestricted free agent. It's not like the Knicks could have extended him at a number he wanted. So will he leave or not? I still feel pretty good about their odds. It's not like they could have locked him down for an amount that he would have been comfortable with, and now he's fleeing. Kind of like Jalen Brunson with the Mavs. The Mavs could have locked him down with a number Jalen Brunson would have been comfortable with. Instead, he hit unrestricted free agency, and the rest is, well, history, fortunately. So speaking of the Mavs, also, it seems that they have let their health coach, health coach, kind of feel like I'm butchering his title. So I will do the service of actually researching what his title is so as not to insult him. But essentially, as I look for that, it's a good hire because when you consider the Knicks and everything that they had from a health perspective, incredibly injured, it can't really hurt for them to be able to find anyone who can help keep this team really as healthy as absolutely possible, which is certainly an important factor. Casey Smith, that's his name. It's Casey Smith. He's the VP of Sports Medicine. So welcome to Casey. You want to keep stars and players alike healthy. So worked with Team USA, certainly. I'm sure some connections there. Connections all through the basketball world. Connections can't hurt. Just ask Leon Rose. So what will the Knicks do in the next 48 hours? Not entirely sure. Will be entertaining, to say the least. But I know we have questions. I want to get to them because I guarantee that the one big thing that I will talk about will probably be asked at some point in the very near future. So without further ado, we got Kev. He's got my back tonight. Kev, what do we got? What's our first question? Kevin Danishevsky. Well, thank you, Kevin. If the Knicks deal for PG-13, what might a package look like? Kevin, I really appreciate that question because it sets me up exactly what it is. Just, Kevin, you're a great point guard because you set me up for the assists, and I appreciate that. So there's been a lot of talk about Paul George and questions on what does the deal look like? How can this be done? Everything. And now, as you could imagine, I have tried to identify various angles here. What can the Knicks do? How can they get Paul George in the building, hypothetically speaking? And here's the very first thing. There's this mindset, of course, of, well, the Knicks shouldn't get Paul George, period, right? And again, I've had my concerns with Paul George. He had a fantastic season. You have to hope that the health is consistent. Of course, if you're just hiring Casey Smith, you think, hey, maybe that could extend down to reinvigorating the Knicks and their injury maintenance staff. Regardless, Paul George, great season last year, does pretty much everything the Knicks want a 6'9" forward to do. But when you look at Paul George and you look at this team, the prevailing thought that I have seen amongst Knicks fans is, well, don't trade Julius Randle. Keep Julius Randle, add to Julius and Brunson, bring Hartenstein, roll with it. It's hard. It's really tough financially to do that, especially because anytime the Knicks aggregate salary means that they are hard capping themselves at the second apron. So even if they were to be able to make the trade, and remember, you have to send more money out than you receive in order to not be hard capped at the first apron. So it's really tricky to find a way to do that. So if you are essentially, because you're not going to trade Jalen Brunson, that's obvious. If you're not trading Julius Randle, right, then who are you trading? Well, it's not going to be a sign and trade with OG or Hartenstein. It's just not going to work. The math isn't going to do it. CBA, all that. Just put it out of your minds. So really what we're talking about in any situation would be Josh Hart or Dante DiVincenzo. And look, I'm not saying those players are untouchable, but also we know how close they are to Jalen Brunson. If you ask me, do I think that they will include either of those players to get the job done? I just don't think they will. And you can argue and say should or shouldn't. I just don't think they will. That's really the crux of it. So how do you find a way to get Paul George, especially when he's looking for a new contract, big next contract? Julius Randle, also looking for a big next contract. OG Anunoby has to get paid. Isaiah Hartenstein has to get paid. Jalen Brunson, up for a new contract. That's 5 players you have to pay within the next 12 months and 2 weeks, let's call it. 12 months and 1 week. I just don't see how the Knicks, with these new aprons in play with the CBA, can possibly roster those 5 players and still have the depth that they like on this team. I don't see it. I just don't. So the question then shifts to, if it's not going to be Randle staying here with Paul George and Brunson and OG and Hartenstein, what does it look like? Let's go step by step. The first thing, right? There's this idea that with the new CBA kicking in, that teams could try to find a loophole. And that loophole is having a trade done this calendar year. The 2023-24 season has not ended yet. So there's this mindset of, hey, why don't you do that right now, right? You can make it work. Well, you can't. Eric Pincus talked about this. He actually tweeted about it. There is no loophole where it's a deadline of what happens in this year stays in this year. It's not like Vegas. It hits you next year too. Essentially, when the Thunder made the Alex Caruso trade, they committed for the 2024-25 season to be hard capped at the first apron because they took in more money than they sent out with Josh Giddey. And that happened this year, which means that it's not like you can time the move at all to make it work. But let's say you had PG opt in to his contract, and then you're the Knicks and you take Julius Randle and Bojan Bogdanovic's contract for matching. Okay. You could do that this calendar year. Problem is that, number one, Knicks are sending out $46.9 million. By the way, forget about Julius Randle's trade kicker situation. Like, just ignore that for the sake of it, just for right now. Randle and Bojan together, $46.9 million this year, this calendar year, out the door. Paul George, $45.6 million out the door. What that would mean is that the Knicks would be hard capped at the second apron in 2024-25. But the Clippers are taking in more money, so they would be hard capped at the first apron for 24-25. That's a non-starter for them. They're not going to want that. So then you think about potential workarounds. Okay, well, what if you did Randle and Bogdanovich, and you also did Paul George and, say, Kobe Brown? Then that way you would be able to say, and this is in this calendar year, right? 2023-24. The way that you would try to work it is you'd have more money going out than in. But here's the problem. Clippers can't aggregate salaries in the 2023-24 season because they're above the second apron. Now, there might be a slight workaround, but also that doesn't solve the problem that the Knicks would be hard capped at the first apron because they'd be taking in more money. So realistically, any trade that happens, it's more likely not to happen in this calendar year, but the next one, 2024-25. And mind you, as all of this is happening, this doesn't even touch upon the fact that Julius Randle might need to get paid. And if Julius Randle and the Knicks can't come to a decision on getting paid, there's a huge problem. It is truly shit or get off the pot with Julius. Because if Julius does not extend, it's his right, 2-time All-NBA player. He has every right to want to get paid the most that he can. But the problem is, if he doesn't, then number one, the Knicks can't trade him next year, which fine, probably a workaround. Not a lot of stars get dealt during the season, but it's the next summer. If you don't have him under contract, you have to deal with the sign and trade situation, and that's a mess. So let's say they don't and they bring him back. Well, then you have to wait another 6 months. So basically, the Knicks would have until the deadline to move Julius, but what's his value going to be if he's an expiring contract with half a season less than that to go? So this is something to consider, where if the Knicks feel like they cannot come to an agreement with Julius, and we know that their MO has been take talent and upgrade from there, that's why Julius becomes a huge conversation. It's the amount of money you can afford, but it's also him and what you can do with trading him and the hurdles that you have to go through that are different than right now. So 2023-24, it's in the past. Now we're talking about 2024-25, starting, let's say, June 30th, July 1st, when free agency opens. Or maybe the moratorium when it's done. Regardless, once this league year is done. So an option, right? Back to where we're at. Julius Randle and Bojan Bogdanovic going out for Paul George. Okay, well, what's wrong with that? Again, the Knicks are hard capped at the first apron because they're taking in more money. The Clippers, they're fine. They're taking in less money. They're not aggregating any salary. That works for them, but it doesn't work for the Knicks. So that trade, not good. We want a scenario where the Knicks are essentially at worst hard capped at the second apron, and the Clippers aren't hard capped at all, which is really hard to do. Okay, so another trade, theoretically, Randle, Bogdanovic, and Diakite for Paul George. Well, what does that do? That hard caps the Knicks at the second apron, but it hard caps the Clippers at the first apron because they're taking in $1.5 million more than they're sending out, which is a problem. So by this point, if you're still with me, and I don't blame you if you're not, because it is complicated stuff, but we've gone through these two team trades, and it's two teams that are having trouble saying, no, you take more money. No, you take more money. Well, neither of them can because it messes up everything. So what's the solution? The solution is a third trade, really third team. So in this theoretical, you talk about a team with cap space, and the Knicks are, let's say, getting Paul George, right? And they're sending out Julius Randle, and they're sending out Diakite, and they're sending out Bojan Bogdanovic. And the Clippers are sending out Paul George, and then they send out a cheap contract like Kai Jones. And then there's the cap space team. So essentially, it would be Paul George to the Knicks, Randle and Bogdanovic to the Clippers, and Diakite and Jones to this cap space team. Cap space team, they're fine being hard capped at the first apron. They're taking in more money than they're sending out. Let's assume they send out a second round pick that'll never convert. Works for them. For the Knicks, it's fine because they're hard capped at the second apron. They have no problem with it. The problem is that the Clippers they're hard capped at the second apron. And you might be thinking, well, is that really an issue? And I would say yes, because even though the Clippers are saving $3 million in this scenario, they have to pay James Harden. If they get all this money back and they're hard capped to the second apron and they have to pay James Harden, that is a huge problem for them. So let's take a step back. What have we learned so far? We've learned the Knicks can be hard capped at the second apron, and that's probably fine. We've learned the Clippers can't be hard capped at the second apron. We've also learned that the Clippers probably shouldn't be taking back an obscene amount of money because it will impact the James Harden situation. And if they're hard capped at the second apron, it is a huge problem. And then we've learned about the cap space team, which would be fine with it. They'd be totally fine with that whole scenario. Okay, so it doesn't quite work. So we have to keep searching. Then we move on. We can move on to Randle, Bogdanovic, Diakite, and you could then move. Okay, so Randle, Bogdanovic, Diakite going out. Paul George and Kai Jones going out for the Clippers and a cap space team. Even if you send Bogdanovic to that cap space team, the Clippers are still at a disadvantage because they're aggregating salary. So they're still hard capped at the second apron. So it doesn't work. And even if it did, the cap space team is taking on Bogdanovic, Diakite, and Jones. That's $23.5 million of cap space gone. And that cap space team is probably thinking, hold on a second. We were cool taking on $4.4 million for some very small draft equity. we're not cutting into our cap space by $23.5 million just to be nice. If you're giving us a 35-year-old coming off of 2 surgeries and 2 end-of-bench players, we're going to want a whole lot. But again, it's kind of moot because the Clippers, they can't do this. So we've kind of reached an impasse. We're at gridlock. Hold that thought for a second, because there was another thing that happened. The other thing that's going on, rumors about Mitchell Robinson. Mitchell Robinson talks of the Grizzlies, talks of the Pelicans, talks with the Wizards, excuse me. There are plenty of teams that are talking about him. And we learned from Ian Begley that there was a report that the Knicks, I believe it was Ian Begley, it might have been Michael Scotto. Either way, the Knicks were talking with the Wizards about Mitchell Robinson. And that came out. Seemed like the majority of people that I saw on Twitter, because I was curious about reactions, were gravitating towards Kyle Kuzma. And my question, why? Why would it be Kyle Kuzma? Even if the Knicks just moved Mitchell Robinson and they brought back OG Anunoby and they brought back Julius Randle and they brought back Isaiah Hartenstein, why would Kuzma be coming off the bench? Because it's not going to be Randle. It's not going to be OG. They're not going to slide OG to the 2 and move Dante DiVincenzo. That's not how they play. Doesn't make sense to me from any logical positional standpoint. It does not make sense. Kuzma's not coming off the bench. But even if he were, right? What does that trade even look like? Well, Mitch for Kuzma doesn't even work. Salary cap won't allow it. Mitch and Jeffries for Kuzma works. But the Knicks are taking in $6.7 million more, which means they're hard capped to the first apron. They're also hard capped to the second apron because they aggregated salaries, but that doesn't even matter because they're now hard capped to the first apron by taking on more money. Okay. What's a workaround? Well, Mitch and Bogdanovich for Kuzma and Rashawn Holmes. I saw that floating around. Well, the Knicks are hard capped at the second apron, aggregating salaries once again, but also they're taking in $3 million more. So guess what? Hard capped at the first apron once again. And you've got Randle, if you wanted to do that, right? The Kuzma issue and Randle and OG totally solved if you're moving Randle. Not quite sure why you're doing it, but just putting it out there. Randle and Mitch together for Kuzma and Holmes. Knicks are hard capped at the second apron, and the Wizards hard capped at the first apron. So in theory, totally fine. My question, why are the Knicks doing this? It doesn't make any sense. That's not a move that benefits them at all. They get worse by doing that deal. And I don't think the Wizards are moving. They're certainly not moving the second pick overall. They're not going to unprotect the pick, so the Knicks have it. Like, it's just a deal that makes the Knicks worse today, which we know they don't want to do. So then you get even further into it. Okay, well, what if you did Mitch and Bogdanovich and Jeffries and Diakite for Kuzma and Holmes? Sure. That works. Congratulations, right? The Knicks are hard capped the second apron. Wizards are hard capped the first apron. They get Kuzma. But again, the problem still exists with Randle, Kuzma, and OG and Hartenstein. So it doesn't make much sense to me. And now you're probably thinking, what do these have to do with anything else? Well, even if you just moved Randle for PG, it doesn't make sense. The Knicks would be taking on way more. It's not even a legal trade, but even if it were, taking on almost $20 million here, more in salary. So they're hard capped at the first apron. So why am I talking about this? Why am I talking about these? I know there's a lot going on here. So here's my thought. And this is my honest theory. We've got the Paul George rumors. We've got the Mitchell Robinson rumors. We have the Goga Bitadze rumors. What if they were all connected? What if each thing had another leg to it? And it wasn't just the Knicks talking to a bunch of teams about these separate trades. But what if these were all legs of a larger 3-team trade that just have not been released? And I'm saying this as someone with no additional knowledge to ever. I am speculating. I am following the money here. That's just laid out. I've just painstakingly spent the last, 15 minutes talking through all sorts of reasons for why things don't make sense if you look at them other ways. So it's almost a process of elimination. So what does make sense? Okay. Well, Here's my thinking. If the Knicks and the Clippers and the Wizards all got together in the next fiscal year, could they make a trade that benefits all parties involved? Could the Knicks get Paul George if they wanted to and just get hard capped to the second apron? Could the Clippers get what they want and still not be hard capped to the second apron to sign James Harden? Could the Wizards find a way to get Mitchell Robinson and trade something out? So here's what I got. If the Knicks take Julius Randle, Bojan Bogdanovic, Mamadi Diakite, Mitchell Robinson, and Daquan Jeffries, should be about $67 million in outgoing salary. If they do that, and if the Clippers just send Paul George, no one else, not hard capping themselves to the second apron, you then shift to the Wizards. The question with the Wizards is, what would they be sending? And the only answer I can think of is someone I talked about in a recent cap or no cap in Deni Avdija. If you were to do Paul George and Deni Avdija to the Knicks, Randle and Diakite to the Clippers, Robinson, Bogdanovic, and Jeffries to the Wizards. If you did that, the Knicks would save $2.6 million. Right? So they're not hard capped to the first apron. That's good. They're hard capped to the second. That's fine. They can get below that. The Clippers, they would be sending out $48.8 million. And if they just took on Randle Diakite, they'd be taking on $31.2 million. They're not hard capped to the second apron. They're not hard capped to the first apron. And they still have plenty of room to sign James Harden to a max contract. And the Wizards, they're hard capped at the first apron because they're taking on $20 million, which they can still do because of how the math shakes out. If you check this trade, it works. Now, of course, the question is, if you're the Wizards, why am I doing this? Well, it's not out of the kindness of their heart. Deni Avdija, I would say, has more trade value as a wing who can stay healthy and plays strong defense than Mitchell Robinson does. It's just not as premium of a position at the center position. So then you talk about, okay, well, picks, right? I had said on the podcast that I did with John yesterday, I believe that the Knicks will trade out at 25. This is a way to trade out. You give the Clippers the 25th pick. The Clippers should know very well from the Chris Paul trade that Chris Paul opts in, gets dealt, hodgepodge. One of those things is a first-round pick. That was included in the trade. So it would line up in that case. From the Wizards standpoint, you're probably thinking of protected picks that you're sending their way. Not necessarily 2024 picks. They have two of them. They have the second pick and they have the 26th pick. So they don't need more picks this year. Well, what do the Knicks have? They have multiple protected picks. They have the Bucks pick. They have the Pistons pick. They have the Wizards' own pick, which the Wizards probably don't prioritize because they can just do whatever they want. So if you're the Knicks and you were to send out Randle, Robinson, Bogdanovic, the 25th pick, the Bucks first, and the Pistons first, and you get Paul George and Avdija, that is essentially how you move from a team that's got excess salary and a lot of depth. And then from there, you turn it into Paul George and Deni Avdija. It's probably not as simple as I'm making it out to be, but that's essentially how you try to layer it. That's what you try to do here. And we can debate the merits of whether Paul George is worth it or not. And Kevin, I know you asked this question like 20 minutes ago, and I appreciate it. It's just a very complicated thing because I've looked at how these trades look like by themselves as I've laid out. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And there's a way, if you're the Knicks, because you're hard capped at the second apron, even if you do this, right? If you do all of this and you get hard capped, you can still bring back Isaiah Hartenstein. You can still bring back OG Anunoby. But again, it won't be for the same $35 million that has just been tossed around. I still don't fully understand why that's the number that's gospel. I just don't get it. And to make things work, to squeeze everyone in, you get closer to like that $31 million range for OG, which I think is really fair. I don't think it's highway robbery to say that he's not necessarily worth $35 million. But on top of that, right? What's your lineup in this purely hypothetical scenario. You've got Jalen Brunson, Dante DiVincenzo, OG Anunoby, Paul George, Isaiah Hartenstein. Okay, that's your starting five. You've got Deuce McBride off the bench. You've Josh Hart, and you have Denny Avdia. So what do you do from there? Well, Goga Batadze. Maybe that's where the rumor comes in. The Knicks now have full access by being a taxpayer team to the taxpayer mid-level exception, over $5 million, right? Year one, it's $5.183 million. That could go straight to Batadze. So now you've got your starting five, which I mentioned, Deuce, Josh Hart, Denny Avdia, Batadze. You're done? Maybe not, because here is where I talked about yesterday when I said I think the Knicks are going to trade up, right? You might be thinking, well, what else do they have to trade? Well, if they trade from 24 and a few second-round picks to 21, guess what they get to do? They could skip the Suns and the Bucks to get Kolek if he's there. He fills in as your backup point guard. It doesn't have to be Rokas. It doesn't have to be Alec Burks. You could try for that player. If it's not him, there's Jay Mitchell. There are other options that you could find to fit into that role. And then you fill out the back end of your roster, right? Come on down, Ryan Arcidiacono. You get to fill a roster spot. And if you do all of these things that I've talked about, and you could even bring back Precious Achiuwa, by the way, for like $4 million. You do all of that. Knicks have 14 players under contract, which is the minimum they need. Second apron space, $153,132. I know it's complex, and it might sound crazy. And there's a very extreme possibility that a week from now, we look back at this, and it was all it seems to be in the moment, which is fan fiction. I just don't see how these pieces have been moving without other involvement if they feel they can get Paul George. And if they don't get Paul George, this whole argument that I'm making falls flat. All of it. And that's fine. I can live with that. That's okay. But at least that's where the math shakes out, because I don't see how it doesn't fit otherwise. So, Kevin, thank you for that. I appreciate it. This trade would also not hurt the Knicks from a Stepien perspective. And the last thing I'll say before I move on to other questions, if you give Paul George a max, which I know other people are wincing about, and I'm not exactly thrilled about, but if you gave him a 35% max and a star, like a superstar, that was better than Paul George, that was younger than Paul George, hit the market, you don't get hard capped by aggregating salary in 2025. And you don't get hard capped at the first apron by getting more money back than sending out because you have Paul George on a max contract. So a lot of things to see. But again, Kevin, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to let me be a mad scientist just for a moment. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And I appreciate you all joining me on this journey for the last 20 plus minutes. Steve Seville. Hi, Jeremy. Well, first of all, thank you for the super chat contribution. Hi, Jeremy. How would a sign and trade for Klay Thompson around Bojan's contract work? Would you be intrigued by that? There's really no sign and trade that makes sense. I wouldn't be intrigued because Klay Thompson, other than the name, I don't like, is he playing ahead of Dante DiVincenzo? OG Anunoby? Shouldn't be. So are we talking about a backup earning $20 million? Seems like a lot. So, Steve, I don't see it in the cards, and it wouldn't make sense to me. I would not be intrigued by that, unfortunately. But I appreciate the super chat contribution. NJ Latino 85. Can we trade for PG without Randall? As I said in my diatribe, no. 3-team deal where Mitch goes to DC, Clippers get Kuzma, Bogey, McBride, other Knicks minimum salary, and obviously a lot of picks. So again, this is a similar vein, but not quite seeing where it works from the Knicks perspective. With the new CBA, makes things too difficult. Have I tried this trade verbatim? No, I haven't, but I also can tell you that if these are the pieces going and the trade were to work, the likelihood of Paul George being too much from a salary perspective, hard caps Knicks the first apron. We know they can't do that. So I don't think that's going to be working out. Jason M. I'm loving the rumors the Suns are interested in Ryan Dunn. I'm curious, Jason, let me know in the comments if this is because you don't want the Knicks to take Ryan Dunn or because you do want the Knicks to take Ryan Dunn. It is intriguing. Absolutely. Makes sense in my mind, just purely from a basketball standpoint. If you were to say, hey, who can we add to Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, or we're not going to really care about scoring or even shooting, but we need defense. Intriguing, but yes, also rookie, not expecting day one contributions from him. Yeah, I'm intrigued. I know our producer Kev desperately wants Ryan Dunn, likes other guys too. Don't get me wrong, but Jason, Kev might fight you on that one. Kevin Danishevsky. Looks like Donovan's going to re-sign with the Cavs per Shams. Aside from making my Mikal dreams slightly more difficult, sad face, what are the reverberating potential impacts on the Knicks here? I would guess that Donovan Mitchell signing an extension with the Cavs would imply they want to win, which would make a lot of sense. Don't see why this team wouldn't want to. But on top of that, it would be, okay, well, how do they add to this team? How do they make it better? And this was a team that was already pretty good last year, looking to find avenues to be even better next year. So I would say the reverberating potential impacts for the Knicks would be that the Cavs seek to become a better team. And they've got some avenues to do that. I mean, Garland is one example. Allen and LeVert together is another example. There are ways they can do it. Very curious to see how they play out their season and who exactly fits with what Kenny Atkinson now likes. I should also just mention, speaking of Kevin, that Jake Fisher had tweeted, or he wrote in his article, that the Jazz, Knicks, and Rockets continue to check in with the Nets on Mikal Bridges. So it's possible, Kevin, that it's not dead. But again, I would not expect it. Jason M says the Mitch rumors point to PG trade. Randall and Mitch, third team to LA. If Knicks wave Boyan, they can easily stay below the first apron. Yes, Jason, on the similar wavelength. Here, it's really just a matter of how you make the trades work. It's an interesting thought in terms of Mitch, of course, to that third team. In this case, had talked about with the Wizards. Of course, this is also under the impression that Knicks are waiving Bogdanovich, which they could, but I don't know if the math would shake out quite in their favor if they did, if it's for Paul George. Jacob Slavitt. Appreciate the super chat contribution, Jacob. Hey, Jeremy, could you give us some concepts from Mitch Washington deals? Well, don't want to trade him, but I get the business of it. There's one with Avdia. Again, another thing with that. Alex had asked this on the last episode of C.R.E.A.M about Avdia, and my whole thing was I just don't know if there's a lot of playing time. But keep in mind, that was playing time behind OG Anunoby and Julius Randle. And while Julius has been hurt to the last both the last two seasons, Paul George, I don't trust him to stay healthy in the way that I trust Julius, or at least I trust Julius more from a health perspective than Paul George. So getting someone like Avdia in the building makes more sense if you're 3 and 4 miss typically like 20 to 25 games a year. In terms of Mitch Washington deals, again, that's probably the most likely. I just don't get the Kuzma trade. Kispert, it's not enough salary. I feel like if you're trading him to Washington, it's really for one player. But there's also something clear here, which is that the Knicks want to upgrade their depth at the 3-4. Doesn't necessarily mean Julius Randle has to be on the go, to be clear, but that's essentially it. And I get it. You don't want to trade Mitchell Robinson because we're fans. He's the longest tenured Knick. I totally get it. But also, if there's a way to turn Mitchell Robinson into a better player at the 4, and you can sign someone like Goga to basically replicate similar production, and you could say, well, Mitch has done it in the playoffs. He did it against Embiid. He did it with the Cavs series. He did. You're absolutely right. And I'm not taking away from that whatsoever. It's really about allocation of resources. If you can replace one, because the Knicks have a better chance of getting a quality backup 5 by using Mitch to get a backup 4 and signing someone than they do of signing a backup 4. It's really the crux of it. But thank you, Jacob. Nick P. This front office is very shrewd and creative and always look to get their most bang for the buck. I don't even see them going over the first apron. Depends, right? If they use a mid-level exception, if they take in more money, they're over the first apron. The whole thing, my idea with Okoro, who I'm not wedded to that idea, to be clear. I liked it if we were talking about if the Knicks get rid of Bogdanovich and have that MLE to spend, and they don't use it as a traded player exception, that's someone I would target. But that would hard cap them at the first apron. I think the biggest question that if I could ask the Knicks front office one question, that question would be, do you expect the Knicks to go over the first apron this year? And that answer would unlock a lot of thoughts, and it would be able to give us a direction. But we just don't know. So they could be shrewd, and they could be under the first apron the entire season. They could do that. But also, if they're not, it's probably because they did something larger. And if they did something larger, that's exciting. Of course, it depends on what that exciting thing would be and if people would be amped about it or they wouldn't be. Julian, okay, so here's my question. What moves would we have to make to pull off the supposed Hunter/Murray acquisitions Macri and CP proposed? So let's say the Knicks did bring in DeJounte Murray and DeAndre Hunter into the fold. I mean, talking about $50 million in salary. Just napkin math, it'd probably be, if you're not moving Randall, which in this case you're not, I suppose it's Bogdanovich, it's Mitchell Robinson. But again, that's a larger salary essentially than Paul George, or that's around the same thing. So how are you doing it? How are you able to move those pieces if you're not moving Julius Randle? It's tough, but again, I don't see the fit with DeJounte Murray. The whole mindset of it was last January, if you wanted to take his salary to try to ladder step your way through, that red paperclip mentality, but that's not what this is anymore. It's who fits best around Jalen Brunson. Okay, so also you're adding another player making 18, 20 some odd million dollars to come off the bench. It's one thing if you get a guy like Avdia on a descending contract earning 15, but Hunter it's ascending. It just doesn't make sense to me. That's far too rich than teams typically do. And maybe the Knicks can be unorthodox. I just don't think they will be in that type of situation. I don't think they're going to have a bench player earning a bloated contract that's more than Josh Hart. And I'm not saying Josh Hart's contract is bloated. I'm saying DeAndre Hunter's is. That's an expensive contract. I'd hard pressed to see that type of move going through. It'd take a lot. Darren Hood. Hey, Jeremy, which strategy do you see the Knicks heading towards? Candidly, I mean, this is going to sound pretty silly and boring. I see them heading in the direction of being the best version of themselves. I don't say that as an insult to your question, Darren. I mean that as just they're going to keep looking for avenues to improve. That's all they've been doing since they started here. They keep looking to find a way to get better every single year, and it didn't pan out in the 2021-22 season, or at least the 2022-23 season, I should say. No, I was right. 21-22 season. So, but they're going to keep trying to be the best team that they can be. That's why I don't think the Paul George rumors are crazy, because you can look at Julius Randle and say he's 29 years old. Paul George is 34. One is closer to his prime than the other. Also, Paul George is really good. And I say that as someone who was incredibly low on him last year because of all of the concerns that I know are valid. But if you find someone who is a seamless fit with what you're looking for, that changes everything. A big issue that I think the Knicks are probably going through is, as great of a player as Julius Randle is, and he doesn't have a great catch and shoot. Pull-up game, not very strong. Also doesn't play the 5 much. And I'm not even saying, hey, Paul George, going to play the 5. But it's like he's locked into that position. It's harder to be versatile with Julius Randle when he's just a 4. And he can't play the 5. And they don't shift him to the 3 because why would they? So he's locked in, and you have to build around that. And it's a clunkier piece. And I say that as someone who's just also a really big fan of Julius's and appreciative of his maturity and growth while in New York. But it also, I see the comments online. I see them on Reddit. I get the concern. Believe me, I do. I also see the upside. I see what the best version of this team looks like. And I just feel like we can say, oh, well, if the Knicks were healthy last year, they could have given Boston a run for their money. And maybe they could have. Maybe they absolutely could have. But also, presumably, the Celtics are running it back. They don't have a lot of ammo to get better. And they probably do one or two, maybe one thing. But the Knicks, what if the conversation went from the Knicks could give the Celtics a run for their money and we'll see what happens to the Knicks improve drastically as a team this year. And they're really good. And they got to stay healthy. And that's a huge concern. But they're really good as is. That is what I think the mindset has to be. And if that involves Paul George, great. So be it. But it still makes me wonder about Julius Randle. And the biggest thing is the contract. If you said to him, are you going to sign this extension? And he says no, it kind of seals his fate in a lot of ways because the math gets so much harder and you lose control, right? The thing that I try to live by as a person is control what's in my control because I can't control what's out of my control. I can't control what the Knicks do. I can just control what my reaction is to it. The Knicks have little to no control if Julius Randle hits unrestricted free agency next summer, which is exactly what he does if they can't agree to an extension. And now if Julius does agree to an extension, great. Awesome. Because it's very possible the whole Paul George thing doesn't even pan out and it's business as usual. And they try to make improvements elsewhere. But I think they're going to do more than that because they have been consistently going layer by layer, adding. At what point do they say we need to add at the top? Because they've been going for more of the bottom rungs and building through the middle. So Darren, I see them finding avenues to be the best version of themselves. And if that involves Paul George, it involves Paul George. If it involves Mikal Bridges, it involves Mikal Bridges. Like, that's where I think they go. Jason M. Appreciate the super chat contribution. Randall and Mitch for Paul George. Wave Boyan below the first apron. Definitely possible. Could do that. They would open the door as well where, and I appreciate you clarifying that. That's a great point. Would be able to do that and make it work. Because it would be, well, no. Now I'm trying to think it through because you've got the 28.9 and Mitch's salary comes down a bit. Jason, you sure? Because I feel like Randall and Mitch doesn't get you to the Paul George number, which is 45. Like if you were to just, I'll do this very quickly. If you got Randall and Mitch together, it's 43.25 million, unless the trade kicker can get them there, which maybe, but I just don't. It's tricky. It would have to be a 3-team deal at least, but maybe. But I don't know. There's more to it than that legs wise, but I at least like the thinking. I'd want to take more time to chew on it and run it through the numbers, but I know from past experiences, Jason's a smart guy, so I'll take his word for it on this one. Buzzer Beater, appreciate super chat contribution from you. Is there a resource where fans can learn the CBA? It's a great question. A lot of it is self-taught, and a lot of it is me asking people who are kind enough to devote time to answering and confirming my questions, which there are people out there. There are cap experts who are kind and willing to donate the time to help situations like this. But if you're looking to learn, Bobby Marks created a CBA 101. It was based off of someone named Larry Cohen, had something called CBA FAQ. I believe that's a little bit more dormant. But if you go on to which website? It's sportsbusinessclassroom.com. If you go there, one of the things that always pops up is essentially it's Bobby Marks' face saying free download Bobby Marks' CBA cheat sheet, and it's a 2024 update. So if you want to do that, you enter your name, enter your email address. It's a great way. It's complicated, but Bobby does a nice job of explaining things. So if you're looking to learn, that's it. I'd also say other angles. what is it? Hoops, not Hoops Hype, but there's something hoops related that's very good. Hoops Rumors, maybe. Real GM has some good stuff. It's tricky. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of reading. It can be really boring and incredibly confusing. But if you're looking for a way to learn, there are good resources out there. I'll also give a plug to, and this is certainly harder to do. It's not something I have done in the past, so I can't speak on it personally. But I know every summer league, the sports business classroom does a thing with kind of like a group learning of the CBA, and they get to do fake trades and fun things where you learn a lot through the classes, and they bring in people to help instruct. Looks appealing. Again, never did it. But if you're looking for various ways, if you're going to summer league, if you have the finances to do that, then that's another angle. But it's really just reading. And I think the biggest thing in terms of a resource is allow yourself to be wrong. Like, there's a lot of chaos out there, and it's not always going to go the way that you think it's going to go. It's not black and white. The CBA stuff, that is black and white, but a lot of the stuff, when it's acted out in reality, it's in full color. So just the other thing I'd say, and this comes from anyone that makes fake trades, and we're all susceptible to this, right? It's hard to know exactly what a team wants if we don't follow them religiously. One of the best pieces of advice I can give you that I do in my day job, always put yourself in the client's shoes. Always think through, what is it that they want out of this? Because usually as fans, the first thing that we do is, well, I want this, I want that, and I'm sure this team will take that. But you got to also think, well, what are they probably looking for? What interests them? It's just something that help their life in general as well, but also when it comes to trades. And maybe it's not that serious, but I like to think it is. But I appreciate the question. I hope you get to study up a little bit more. And if you have questions, people have CBA questions. I know now is a little bit of a busy time, but I do try to be a resource, harder on Twitter, but my DMs are open. If you feel like asking questions, happy to help when I can. Jordan Bubb, what would Jeremy's perfect cap-related draft night be for the Knicks in terms of value, gaining of newer assets, and of picking a player? Of course. Reason I was chuckling is, Jordan, I know I owe you an answer for the perfect offseason. So I already said so many words earlier about the Paul George thing, so I'm just going to leave it at that. If it were like, hey, the Knicks are getting Paul George, what would it be? That would probably be my Sistine Chapel, Mona Lisa type move of how I would orchestrate all those pieces. But in terms of draft night, again, I'm not the draft guy, but if you do really like a player, because you have to work backwards, what's your main objective? Is it Paul George? Is it Bridges? Is it other players? If it is, how do you go about it? And then you work backwards, because they can go best player available. But if they get Paul George, maybe Ryan Dunn doesn't make the most sense, because if you're also getting Denny Avdia and you have Josh Hart, like, a lot has to happen in order for Dunn to be signed or to be drafted. So it all depends on the bigger dominoes to fall and then the rookies coming into play. But I said before, 3 areas of need, right? In my opinion. This was assuming that the roster was mostly staying intact, of course, but it was backup point guard, add a wing who can help you, and add some front court depth. But if you're going out and trying to get a star, you should probably look to use the best player available more as, where can this player help me? Because the Knicks could take a player like Dunn, for example. If they did everything I talked about, and instead of trading up to get Kolek, they took Dunn. That's great. Maybe he helps them in a few years. Right now, right this moment, how are they solving any backup point guard position? Maybe it's Alec Burks, but also, is he the player you trust at 34? Maybe it's Rokas. He's still also going to be a rookie when he comes over. Like, so will Kolek. So will any other player that the Knicks draft. But that's the thought, right? Like, you got to get someone in the door. Do you want it to be the older veteran? Do you want it to be the younger player? I don't have the answer to that. I just know that if the Knicks stacked their team, they're probably going to want to balance it out using their rookies, especially if they like them. So thank you Jordan, I appreciate that question and finally got to answer the other one. Buzzer beater. With another super chat. Thank you. Will Dolan go over the cap to bring back the core? I don't see any reason why not. It doesn't seem like Dolan's being cheap. It just seems like the Knicks, they're saying you don't have to spend. Like, well, if I ever get rich enough to have $5 million, like I could buy a $4 million house, or I could just be happy with a $2 million house if I don't have to buy a $4 million house. I think that's kind of the mindset with the Knicks. Sure, they could. They just haven't because they haven't needed to. They've been fine. Also, keep in mind, they were hard capped this past year, and they were a cap space team the year before that. So it's not like they really needed to go into the tax. And the year before that, they were a cap space team. The year before that, they were also a cap space team. So it's not like there's been a ton of times. Yeah, they could have made a trade, but realistically, they've kind of just been stuck in this position. I don't mean stuck in a bad way. I just mean that's where it is. So that's right. But I think he will spend. Knicks, appreciate the super chat contribution. How high do you think the Knicks could trade up in the draft with 24 and 25? What is the salary slot for those picks? Would they save money with one pick? Well, Knicks, we actually went through this with John last night. Dropped today at midnight Eastern Standard Time, I believe. Answering those questions. So I don't want to do a cop out and say go listen to that pod, but also go listen to the pod. Help us out. Add a download. Add another view to the YouTube. Whatever you say. Appreciate the cash here, and I'll give you a very quick short answer, which is teens, high teens. But for more on that, it would really do the whole discussion that John and I had less of a service because we had a great time and we enjoyed it. So recommend you and anyone else who hasn't been able to listen to that pod, go forth and do that one. Would appreciate it. But thank you for the question and the super chat. El Coriano 11. Appreciate your super chat. Any aging stars that would accept the mid-level exception, taxpayer or non, to chase championship a la Karl Malone joining Lakers in his final year? DeRozan? I would say any aging star should not be signed to a mid-level exception. If they really want to win, they should probably sign a veteran minimum. And the reason I say that is because we've talked through about mid-level exceptions for older players. Doesn't usually work. But also, a lot of it comes down to fit. Like DeRozan, we've talked through why the fit doesn't really make sense. Also, I'm sure you can get more money elsewhere. So I'm going to say no. Have them be veteran minimums. If they really want to chase a ring, got to sacrifice somewhere. How about your wallet? But appreciate the question. Thank you. Robert W. Cross. Said, I thought Chris Persianen had his show tonight. My bad. Yeah, I'd be salty too if I just went on air talking about trading Mitchell Robinson. But, it's just me. Robert, if the Knicks trade Mitch, are you going to change your legal name to Robert L. Cross? I just want to know. That's my only question. Nick P. What can the Knicks do to remain under the first apron and get the first apron, improve their team? Apologies, I don't quite understand the question. If it were to remain under the first apron, it'd have to be something like getting Bogdanovich's contract non-guaranteed and then signing someone with a mid-level exception, not the full mid-level exception, most likely. That's why I talked through the Okoro deal where it was like, look, if you wanted to stay below the first apron and add talent that fits with what you're doing somewhere, that would be it, right? A younger player who we know can shoot at a decent clip. That is essentially the direction. Other than that, not a ton of options. One thing I would consider if I were the Knicks, you could also use a trade player exception, which the NTMLE is now, and acquire a salary and then use that later on in the season to get a higher salary from there. Right? Like you could get someone in the door for 11 million. And then at the deadline, you call up a team that has a player for 13 million and swap those players as long as you're below the first apron. That's the only thing I can think of for if the Knicks wanted to remain under the first apron. But if they did that, if they're under the first apron, everything's pretty much status quo. There's probably not a lot of movement going on. Not to say there couldn't be, but probably not a ton. Reynaldo Maldonado, do you think that there will be any trade? You think the Knicks will keep their picks? You know, I went out on a limb with the Paul George crazy idea, so I'll say sure. Like that's what I think is going to happen. Sure, why not? What do I have to lose? In terms of keeping their picks, I'd gather they keep one of their picks, trade up, trade out with the second, and then keep 38. That will be my guess. Will, hey Jeremy, what are the odds that the Knicks re-sign their guys or just simply run it back? Also, how do you feel about Chris Dunn on the veteran minimum? Odds the Knicks re-sign their guys, just run it back, slim. Just because every year they've tried to make upgrades, like that's what they do. Team was good, and we could say, well, they'd be fully healthy, and I'd agree. But the Knicks front office, they're not going to just be like, well, we feel good enough about last year's team to just run it back as is, right? Like there are going to be warning signs for them where it's like, yeah, health was a concern, but there are also things we would do differently if given the opportunity. And this is an opportunity for them to do something differently. In terms of Chris Dunn, veteran minimum, I mean, maybe, but if memory serves, the 3-point percentage wasn't there. And if it did get there in a season, which I think it might have last season, again, forgetting a lot of players to keep track of, but there was a season where I believe his 3-point percentage looked pretty good. I think it was just on a limited sample size of threes. So don't think he makes the most sense. Sorry, Will. And J Latino, 85. How does bringing in Rokas affect our cap sheet? Bringing in Rokas doesn't really do much. And the reason for that is the second round exception, which was introduced into the new CBA. The salary is really cheap. We're talking about 1.2, a little less than $1.2 million next year. And the year after that, it's a little under $2 million. And the year after that, it's not a ton. Might be in the threes. No, that's in the twos as well, I believe. Fourth year's a team option, but you'd probably decline the team option to make him a restricted free agent if he's good enough. If he's not, you could make him unrestricted free agent. But in terms of affecting the cap sheet, it's basically from a year-long standpoint where you sign a player for a full contract. It is the least harmful thing you could possibly do because of how small that amount is. So nothing to worry about there. Juanon, appreciate the Super Chat contribution. Thoughts on Eric Gordon for the MLE? Not sure we have the role for him there to get minutes, but the fit would be nice. Also, Houston seems inclined to improve. Think Mitch would be of interest. Salute. Juanon, I'm surprised. No hashtag at the end of this. Are we pleased with one Tom Thibodeau now? Clearly we can't. Eric Gordon for the MLE, too much. It's too rich. Again, older player. Wouldn't give him that. Basically, I'd say, hey, you want to win here? Veteran minimum, just like you did in Phoenix. I believe you signed for the veteran minimum there. With Houston, I don't think Mitch would be of interest unless Şengün is on the move or they move Steven Adams. But I just don't. It wouldn't be Mitch backing up Şengün, most likely. I think anywhere you trade Mitch, you're probably getting him in a full-time role. Probably. Yeah. I mean, he's a starter, just not on this team. But I think you'd try to get him to a team where you could be that. Like, keep in mind, Knicks have tried to find play time for players they've dealt elsewhere. RJ and IQ are starting. Obi was starting, and then the Pacers decided he shouldn't start. It's not the Knicks' fault. Quentin Grimes, hurt. Couldn't do much. But they've created these opportunities, and I just think they will try to do that for Mitch, and I don't think that would be Houston. But thank you. Appreciate that Super Chat contribution. Buzzer beater. Man, appreciate buzzer beater. You're on fire today. Thank you. OG was in the right place and time with New York. If he left, he might make more money, but he wouldn't be as successful. If he leaves, do we go after Oubre? So I just don't get the Oubre love. I really don't. Like, this is a guy who has shot over 35% from deep once in his NBA career. Like, look at what the Knicks are building. I don't mean this just towards you, buzzer beater, just in general. Like, if you take this Knicks team, which is one of the best shooting teams that I've seen in my lifetime from the Knicks, you wouldn't want to add someone like Oubre to the fold. You would, like, there's another team that might better emphasize his talents, that might not care as much, right? Like a team like Philly, they've got Joel Embiid spacing big. They might be more comfortable having the floor shrink a little bit with someone like Oubre if he can make it up on the defensive end. And there are times where perhaps he can. The defensive EPM, it's good. So it's really just a matter of, what does he do for the Knicks? And I can't look at what the Knicks have done the last 2 years with their trades, players going out, players coming in. Looking at that, I can't look at a player like Kelly Oubre Jr. and be like, that's the guy. Like, bring him on board, right? Like, he doesn't fit their MO. Like, same thing with someone, and this is on a much larger scale, don't get me wrong, Jimmy Butler, right? Forget about the Heat, the fact that Pat Riley and the Knicks and all that jazz. Really talented player, flies in the face of what the Knicks have done. And I just feel like they need to keep looking for players who zig where they zig and don't zag where they zig. And Kelly Oubre, he zags. And I think there's an argument to be made that someone like Julius Randle doesn't necessarily zig in the same direction. A lot of traits the Knicks like, he has. The open looks, fantastic. Could wax poetic about an all-NBA player, but we're on a time crunch, so not going to do it. But even he is not as seamless in terms of what the Knicks have been operating on. And I don't think Oubre is either. Actually, I don't think. I know Oubre isn't. The stats back that up. So don't see the Knicks going after Oubre, especially if OG were to leave, which I still don't think he will. Buzzer beater, which Knicks all-time do you hate the most? It's a great question. I don't hate Kristaps Porzingis. I think it's all about maturity. I didn't grow up with the 90s Knicks, but Oakley sullying a lot of the legends, not too fun. It's a great question just because I haven't spent a lot of time hating former Knicks. Maybe someone will come to me. I don't know. I'm trying to think of players who are just exceptionally corny, and there's got to be one. But in terms of, like, can't stand them, I don't know. I would need to take more time to think about it. Yeah. Not a lot of guys I hate. Marvin Remy, are the Knicks really looking at trying to add AD? Sorry. If they're looking, I can answer this either way. Number one, if they're looking to add talent in general, sure. Number two, if it were Anthony Davis, if LeBron James left LA, then sure, maybe they're interested in some capacity. But yeah, apologies, Marvin. I don't know. Dirty Dancer. Not quite understanding the trigger to the first apron or the second. Is it merely how much money the team accepting extra has already spent? I know it's a lot. It's confusing. There's just a lot going on. So I will try to run this as quickly and as easily as I can. Basically, a team becomes hard capped at the first apron if they use more than the equivalent of the tax mid-level exception out of the non-tax mid-level, right? So a team has access to the non-tax mid-level. If they use anything more to the penny than the equivalent of the tax mid-level, they're hard capped at the first apron. If they use the biannual exception, hard capped to the first apron. If they acquire a player via sign and trade, same thing. signing a buyout player who made more than the non-tax mid-level on the previous contract. So if someone who on their previous contract was earning more than like $11.859 million, whatever it is, they cannot be signed by a team that's over the first apron. Using more than 100% in salary matching in a trade over the first apron, right? That's more money coming in than going out. That's basically what that one means. Using a traded player exception that was created in a prior season, hard caps the first apron. The Knicks have 3 traded player exceptions at their disposal, but if they used any of them because they were used in the past or because they were generated in the past, they can't go over the first apron. The second apron, right? Over the second apron, you get hard capped at the second apron if you use the tax mid-level exception, if you aggregate any salaries together, 2 or more players in a trade, if you send out cash in a trade, hard capped to the second apron, acquiring a player using a traded player exception that was created via a previous sign and trade. Confusing, I know. You guessed it, hard capped to the second apron. What you can do is, and this is assuming you're not exactly hard capped. If you're hard capped, that's the line. Can't go past it. But you can re-sign your own free agents, sign draft picks. You can sign players to minimum contracts. You can make trades where one player's salary is sent out and an equal or less salary comes back. You can do a 1-for-2 or more trade. All of what I just mentioned is from a graphic that Keith Smith had, which is very helpful. So thank you to Keith. As always, does great work. And that's the explanation. And I know it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. Even I sometimes I'm like, wait, that does hard cap this? Okay, yeah, I guess it does. So if it confuses me, probably confuses you too. It sucks. Life doesn't have to be this complicated. And yet, it is. JD, Robinson, Bogey, and the protected picks for Avdia, Tyus Jones, $14 million per year sign and trade, one-stop shop with the Wizards. Thoughts? This just won't work from the sign and trade perspective, aggregating salary, and it's a nightmare. So sign and trade with the player coming in. Also, as we just talked through, it would hard cap you, which would not be good. It'd be a problem. Now, more money would be going out, but also with this deal, if it were 14 or 15 plus 19, that's 34. I guess the math could match, but other hurdles. So sorry, JD. Daniel I, do you think it's feasible to trade the number 25 for a future first, even if it's heavily protected? Is there precedent for trading out with a pick that late in the first round? Keep up the great work. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate that. I would steer you towards the work John and I did for the Monday pod. Check that out. We talk about 25 and how it's really tough to trade out for a future first, even if it's heavily protected in that slot. Not impossible, but tricky, especially with this draft class. But if you wanted more in-depth information, would recommend that. KC Popov, could Boyan, Mitch, 2 firsts for Jeremy Grant on the Blazers work? If it does, can we still swap Randall with other players for Paul George? If you are moving Boyan and Mitch for Jeremy Grant, then you are basically committing to adding Randall with Hart. Don't see it happening. So I think anytime you use this as kind of like a nucleus, I mean, there might be a way. No, I'm not. There's not. I was going to say you could do a 3-team trade, but that wouldn't involve Paul George. So no, this can't work. Apologies. Unless, of course, you deal Josh Hart. But 631 Dro, how about John Wall for the veteran minimum? Didn't play last year. Don't know what he's giving. The shooting doesn't fit with what the Knicks like. I think the biggest issue for fans watching the game is you look at players who are so good in their prime and they age out of it. And it's easy to want to reclaim the magic, but it doesn't really happen. It's tough. So there are other players like John Wall, like the DeMarcus Cousins of the world, the Dwight Howards, like those guys, where at one point they were dominant, they were elite, but they're not anymore. And it's kind of like why not? What do you have to lose? And I get that thought, but what you have to lose in this case is salary, especially if you're up against an apron or a tax. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to get John Wall, in my opinion. Like, again, as Fred Katz has talked about, incredibly smart player, but just not what the Knicks need. Not right now. Well, it seems like we don't have any questions left. So I want to thank everyone. Really appreciate taking the time. Thank you for tuning in. As always, thank you for watching. We will have more content this week. My goodness, what a week this will be. It'll be an exciting one. We'll have Chris doing his thing. Got a draft live stream coming. I want to say there's another episode of Dream, but I feel like there might not be. But I want to say there is. So if there isn't, apologies. And if there is, check out Chris on Dream. Check out John on NBC. Very exciting for him to be able to be on with NBC4, local affiliate here in New York. And thank you to Kevin tonight for producing this pod. Appreciate it as always, Kev. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, but no. I don't know. The next time I'll see you all, or you'll see me, but maybe there'll be chaos. Maybe there won't be. As always, wait. Oh, last at the buzzer beater. Parrish Duggar, though, not buzzer beater, but appreciate you, buzzer beater. Thank you for the super chat contribution. I honestly think we're still great as long as we keep the Nova boys and Randall together. Let's be careful overpaying iHeart and OG, especially Coro, Oubre, PG-13, Kuzma, and my sleeper, DeAndre Hunter. Some good options in there for sure. Very curious to see how the Knicks are able to get any of those players. A lot of different stipulations that would come into play. Again, we'll find out answers to this pretty soon, which will be exciting. In the meantime, try your best to wait for trades to come out and we get the full details. Hopefully it's not like a Alex Caruso, Josh Giddey situation where people are like, well, where are the picks? And then they never arrive. But we'll see. I expect chaos. Just a hunch. Just a guess. Anyways, appreciate it all. Thank you so much. Be well.